Happy New Year to all, and welcome back to SockchoyTV, and to the second installment of my experimental series, Reboot, where I review an animated property and discuss how I'd reboot or revive it if I had the chance. Thank you all so much for the warm reception I got from my first attempt with that lesser than stellar Powerpuff Girls reboot. But today I pay tribute to an equally, if not more beloved CN classic, because Lord knows Cartoon Network won't. Unless they find a way to hypocritically inject the female power agenda into your cartoon made to entertain and not be a sermon, chances are your show probably won't come back. Even if they deserve to and there's a high demand for it. You hear me? But that's a topic for another time. Today we're here to honor Robot Rebel Ranch. Huh? What's that? My mistake, folks. Quick change here. I've just been informed that we're here to talk about Ed, and Eddy? Alright, my apologies again for my meager attempts at humor. Ed, Edd n Eddy was an all-time favorite for a lot of people back then. Go ask anyone over 21 their top 5 favorite Cartoon Network shows. Betcha Ed, Edd n Eddy will be at least number 2. And rightfully so. Ed, Edd n Eddy was such a standout from the other cartoons in terms of its art style and self-aware humor. Ed, Edd n Eddy was the brainchild of Canadian animator Danny Antonucci, whose credits include animating on several Hanna-Barbera cartoons in the 80s, like The Smurfs, The Velveteen Rabbit, The Chipmunk Adventure, and several commercials for the likes of Converse and even MTV. His original work before the Eds includes the short film Lupo the Butcher and The Brothers Grunt on MTV. The idea for the Eds came about when Danny was dared to make a cartoon appropriate for kids, when his 2 originals mentioned before were geared towards the adult audience. The show follows 3 boys so different from each other, yet they have one thing in common: their name. You got Single D-Ed, the dumb lovable one with superhuman strength, Double D-Ed, the intellectual and panicky neat freak, and the headstrong and impulsive Eddy. He's the leader of the group, transformed from the norm by the new...
Wrong cartoon, Eddy.
Eddy's the main drive for the group's mischief, always devising these nonsensical scams to con the neighborhood kids out of their money. All for the ever-elusive Jawbreaker. What in their world is regular everyday candy, in our world would be an edible bowling ball. If you're looking for a Jawbreaker roughly around this size in our world, try the Black Forest Cafe in Vermont. For one reason or another, these scams never turn out the way they're intended, whether it be the other neighborhood kids using their common sense, most notably Kevin, who affectionately adorned the Eds with the pet name of Dork! Dork! Dorky! Dorky! Dork! Or Canker Interference. Yes, everyone remembers the Canker Sisters. 3 hussies sent by the devil himself to relentlessly torture the Eds. Yes, each and every character in this show is iconic in their own right, but none more so than Rolf, son of a shepherd.
Rolf respects your vow to uphold the sticky notes of elders, yet you must be punished.
What is that, Rolf?
The hat of discipline. Do you live in a cave? All is forgiven.
Still today, we have no idea where this immigrant child came from, but we love him just the same. But the appeal of the show doesn't just stop at the characters. So now will be a perfect time to discuss the show's visuals. Danny wanted his show to be remembered for how different it was from the other CN shows at the time, since so many of them were visually inspired by Hanna-Barbera and UPA animation. The Ed's iconic boiling lines look was carried over from the cartoons of the 1930s, like Felix the Cat, Popeye, or Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. And don't even get me started on the show's jokes. Its diverse array of humor is another huge factor to the show's success. It was a mixed bag of slapstick comedy, self-aware humor, character interactions, Rolf and Ed's dialogue, and both intentional and unintentional visual gags. Jeez, this show was incredible. And its fan base is still growing to this very day. Ed, Edd n Eddy was so popular that after its initial cancellation, it was granted a 5th season, and a 6th season turned into a movie. a movie that has yet to be released on DVD. Whether it be reruns on Boomerang or ridiculous memes on the internet, Ed, Edd n Eddy still remains a major landmark in animation history, with an ever-growing fan base. With an iconic ratings juggernaut like this in their arsenal, you'd think Cartoon Network would have added it to their lineup of infamous reboots by now. But surprisingly, they haven't. And Mr. Antonucci has made it abundantly clear that he has no interest in rebooting or continuing Ed, Edd n Eddy. And while yes, that is upsetting, you can't fault the man for his integrity. Ed, Edd n Eddy was much more than a measly property or franchise. It was an epic story that rivaled the likes of Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. But that didn't stop the internet from tossing around rumors of an Ed, Edd n Eddy reboot in 2019, with a drastically different or otherwise bland art style, akin to a majority of the shows on the network. While the rest of the world was in panic, I merely scoffed. It's not that I thought I was better than anyone, or could tell from a mile away that this was fake, but everybody was jumping to conclusions without really thinking about the entire situation. Think about this. Ed, Edd n Eddy was originally a comedy. Cartoon Network is now notorious for taking their older properties and turning them into no-holds-barred comedies. Almost all of them have been action cartoons turned into comedies. Cartoon Network turning a comedy into a comedy does not compute. Does not count! Come on, really think about it, people. This is Cartoon Network, making questionable decision after questionable decision. You got Powerpuff Girls, an action comedy. What do? Reboot it as a comedy. Ben 10, an action comedy. What do? Reboot it as a comedy. Questionable ideas all around. Now you take Ed, Edd n Eddy, a slapstick comedy. What do? You flip the script and reboot it as an action comedy. And why would you do that? Well, by CN logic, just because. No reason, no demand. You just leech out most of the goofiness, self-aware humor, and the cartoony slapstick, and add in a serious new art style, twisted backstories, and character development arcs. And let us not be too stingy with the well-endowed, manly physique. Muscles, muscles, we love muscles, 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 we love muscles, muscles, muscles. Now then, an Ed, Edd n Eddy action comedy. What would that look like? What would be the story? Well, CN would probably hand it over to DC and have them fart darkness on it, but here's what I'd do. To start, a little backstory. Following the events of Ed, Edd n Eddy's Big Picture Show, the children of the cul-de-sac have finally accepted the Eds as their equals. Upon witnessing the heroic Captain Melonhead falsely battering the Eds badly, society has chosen to reject him and his mild-mannered alter ego, Jonathan 2x4. It was then when Jonathan retired his rind and brought forth the villainous Gord, along with his mild-mannered companion Plank, as Timber the Dark Shard. And together, they set their sights on taking revenge on the entire cul-de-sac. Timber and the Gord would then devise a heinous act of malice against the neighborhood. Then, disguised as the mild-mannered Johnny and Plank, would accuse the Eds of the decay and destruction. The kids of the cul-de-sac would no longer trust the Eds, returning the neighborhood to the status quo. But even then, the Gord's villainy knows no bounds. Word of the heinous crime reached the parents of Eddie, who, pegged as the frontman, was sent to military school, which quite literally turned Edward Double D to insanity. Without the balance of an empty companion and a half-empty companion, Double D has no equal to converse with. Only Ed. Armed with only his smarts, and his sadly twisted mind over losing his best friend, Edward has convinced himself that the sinister Gord kidnapped Eddie, and has wrongfully whisked him away to another dimension. Edward now works around the clock tirelessly to reopen the portal and bring Eddie back to reality. But where Double D has implemented a delusional hope, Ed has implemented a hobby. Double D's twisted delusional rants are merely gas. The gas that fuels the inspiration that drives Ed's indie sci-fi film hobby. Upon completion of his sophomore year in high school, Single D Edward would then become a film student, utilizing Jimmy as a co-writer and as another companion when Double D is lost in his delusions. Being the lovable oaf and often overbearing big brother he is, Ed has taken it upon himself to learn martial arts in order to protect Sarah, his younger sister. Even though the last thing that girl needs is protection. Now, picture this. The final day of sophomore year. The children have just been released from school, and Ed, Double D, and Jimmy head into summer vacation, only to discover a familiar face has moved back into the cul-de-sac from military school. Yes, Eddie has returned from army training to complete the final 2 years he has of high school.
Eddie is no longer an impulsive and ambitious brat, hell-bent on money and candy, but is now an intellectual, respectful beefcake of a young man, much to his childhood companion's dismay. The mentally twisted Double D concludes that Eddie is simply under the Gourd's mind control. And so begins the journey to remind Eddie of who he is, as well as to reclaim Double D's own sanity, and bring the evil forces that be, the evil Gourd, and his sidekick, Timber the Darkshard, to justice.
And you know, compelling drama, stellar fight and action sequences, maybe a character death here and there, who knows? But if Ed, Edd n Eddy was ever revived into a dark action comedy, that's how I'd want to do it. I have several other ideas for the other characters, but what did you think so far? Is this a revolutionary idea, or am I just as misguided as Cartoon Network? Put your thoughts, or words of ridicule, down there in the comment section and let's talk about it. If you enjoyed my video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and hit the bell so you never miss another video. Until next time, this is the Socks, signing off.